Having the right deliverables for your film is incredibly important. However, each distribution platform like Amazon, Filmhub, etc. are going to have different requirements. Today, I will be showing you how to export your film correctly, including the video format, resolution, frame rate, bit rate, all to ensure that your film meets the technical specifications required by Amazon and Filmhub. I will personally be using Adobe Premiere Pro for this tutorial, but don't worry, you can pretty much use any professional video editor and accomplish the same thing. However, those using consumer editors like CapCut or iMovie or something similar, I don't know if you're going to be able to accomplish the same thing. Follow this tutorial if you can, and if not, you may have to do an upgrade temporarily to finish your film. Before we get started, let's review the requirements on each of these platforms. And of course, both of these will be linked in the description for easy reference. I will say that we'll talk about both Amazon and Filmhub, but honestly, if you follow the Filmhub tutorial, you can pretty much use that file anywhere. So first, we're going to start with Amazon here, and there's a bunch of information. We're not going to go over every single thing on here just because that would make this tutorial way too long, but we'll go over some of the basics. Like I said, everything you pretty much are going to need is within Filmhub's requirements as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. They're pretty much the same for the most part. At the beginning, they say that source files must not contain bars and tone, test patterns, production slates, blah, blah, blah. So obviously you pretty much have to have the clean movie file by itself. No, like you're not exporting this for TV or anything like that. So you won't need anything like the slate or anything like that at the beginning or the end. All video assets uploaded to Prime Video Direct must have a progressive scan type. If your video contains interlace, please choose the de-interlace function on your video editor / transcoding software when exporting your video. The file header must accurately describe the display aspect ratio of the content. Anamorphic sources must include accurate 4:3 or 16:9 aspect ratio flags. So essentially they're saying that you are not going to be able to do this kind of natively. They're going to want either a 4:3 or a 16:9. So that may be the only difference between this and Filmhub, where Filmhub actually wants your original aspect ratio. So for instance, you have something that's in the scope because you shot anamorphic, you're probably going to have black bars at the top and the bottom. Or if you shot some other, skinnier, not necessarily skinnier, but more the square aspect ratio like 4:3, you might have bars on the side. So they have a few different file codecs here. We have the AVC/H.264, which is the one I don't recommend using, but they do accept it if needed. We have ProRes 422, which is what I'm going to be using for this tutorial. And then we have MPEG-2 as well. Now, like I said, I'm going to be using ProRes 422. So if you want to use H.264, if you need to create a smaller video file, or if you need to use MPEG-2 for the same reason, that's fine. I'm not going to go over that here. We're going to primarily focus on ProRes 422. So for ProRes 422, we have a couple different things here. It's going to be in the .mov, so that'll be your tag at the end of the video file. It's going to be HQ, so we're going to export this in ProRes 422 HQ, not anything else, although I have tried it other ways and it was fine. So I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. The recommended bitrate is 220 megabits per second, and for HD, and for SD, it's 110 megabytes. We're going to be doing this, pretty much the standard Premiere export for 422. So won't worry about this too much. We'll have a look at what it says. Key interval frame, not applicable. ProRes files are iframe only, so wouldn't worry about that. Audio format, PCM. Recommended audio bitrate, lossless. Sample rate, 48 kilohertz. And then down here we have some information for the recommended resolutions. So if you're doing something for SD, it needs to be at least 640 by 480 for 4:3, or 640 by 360 for 16:9. We're not going to do SD, but it's there if you only want to upload an SD for some reason, but we're going to focus on HD, which we have 1280 by 720. We're not going to use that. We're going to use the 1920 by 1080 because we want to have the best file possible. And then we should also note that Amazon Prime Video Direct currently doesn't support 4K UHD, so we're not even going to pay attention to 4K, although of course you can have a master file in 4K if you wish. And then they list the different frame rates. We're not going to focus on this too much because I'll just kind of go over my frame rate in the example. And then they have a list of the different aspect ratios. If you have some sort of funky aspect ratio. If not, standard 16:9 is going to be fine for you. For frame rates, they recommend that you choose constant rates instead of variable frame rates because they will reject variable frame rates apparently. And it says they support the following frame rates. So most of you film nerds are probably going to be using 24 frames per second. So this 23,976 for the 24 is probably going to be your standard. And then we have the 25 frames per second for the European countries or whoever uses PAL, the PAL format. We're not going to pay attention to that. My film is in the 23,976, so that's what we're going to focus on in this tutorial. But if you do have some other frame rate, make sure you read this carefully to make sure that it, fits within their requirements. And then the bit rates, here's some information on bit rates, but we already talked about that earlier on what they require for SD and HD. So we'll go over that a little bit more when we actually go to export our file ourselves. And then they list some QC places, which I didn't know before, so that's pretty cool. But if you want to try to get your film QC'd before you even submit, here's a couple of places that they recommend. Maybe I'll talk about this in a future video because that's something I'm actually interested in and didn't actually realize until we were recording this video right here. So that's pretty cool. And then they list some common issues, but we'll talk about common issues here in a little bit. And then the same goes for trailers. They don't require a trailer, but I definitely recommend having a trailer. But they have two primary requirements: that it needs to be green band, so no swear words or nudity or anything like that. And the trailers can't be more than 6 minutes long. So if you are using a trailer, keep it normal trailer length and make sure it's appropriate for all audiences. And they have some audio stuff here too, so let's go over that really quick. All audio tracks in the source must be in the same language. The audio track must only contain a single full audio mix, so no M&E tracks or anything like that. It just needs to be all mixed together in either stereo or 5.1. The audio duration and the video duration obviously need to match. And then the audio must meet one of the channel requirements. So they list a bunch of channels. So mono, the stereo, like we mentioned, 5.1, 6 channel or 5.1, 8 channel. We're going to be focusing on stereo in this video because I don't have a 5.1 mix. So we're not going to worry about that. But if you do have a 5.1 mix, you can upload, I think you can upload both if I'm not mistaken. So that's pretty much it for Amazon. So let's go ahead and hop over to Filmhub, which their requirements are pretty much the same, but let's quickly go over them because they have a couple interesting additional things that we need to talk about to try to minimize problems. So audio and video requirements for passing QC, quality control. Submit your video in the highest quality possible. We love 4K files, so they absolutely will take 4K, and they prefer Apple ProRes 422 or 422 HQ, not LT, Proxy 444, HQ, or any other. So 422 or 422 HQ. Again, with Amazon, I've uploaded 422 and not 422 HQ files there, so I don't think they really know the difference. But, if you want to be up to board and all that, I definitely recommend the 422 HQ when possible. And of course, they take Apple ProRes, they take the Avid files, but I'm not going to use that. So if you want to use that, cool. I'm focusing on Apple ProRes. And they do say that they will take H.264, H.265, MPEG-2, DV, blah, blah, blah. I don't recommend it. Like I said, they recommend the highest quality file possible. So let's focus on Apple ProRes 422 just because that's so widely accepted everywhere and preferred. So we're just going to focus on that for this tutorial. But if you need a smaller file for one reason or another, you have the H.264 available to you in the bit rates. So there you go. The different file types. So we're going to focus on the .mov because again, we're using Apple ProRes. Now here's where things get a little interesting because they have a little bit more requirements when it comes to the file itself. So it says max 2 seconds before the program starts and after the program ends, which basically means that your movie needs to start at least 2 seconds after, the video itself starts. So the movie doesn't need to start, but something needs to show up on screen at the 2 second mark. So you can't have, 30 seconds of black before your main title shows up. It needs to be at least 2 seconds at the start and at the end after your credits are all done. And then it says no color bar, slate, yada, yada. Again, This isn't like a cable thing or anything like that, so you're not going to need any of that. The video must start and end on at least one black frame, so you can't start it right away. You need to have at least one black frame at the beginning and the end. No burned-in subtitles except in the trailer. Partial burned-in subtitles are acceptable for mixed language or inaudible dialogue, and they have some requirements for that. That's pretty niche, so we're not going to focus on that here. Not interlaced, no blended frames, no padding, no watermarks, a logo burned throughout, no URLs or promos, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then a few other things that, again, are a little more niche, so we're not going to focus too heavily on that, but if you do have questions about something, feel free to leave it in the comments. Now, they do have some resolution requirements. It says minimum we accept a width of 640 pixels, and the pixel width and height must always be even numbers. We're just going to focus, I won't worry too much about that. We're just going to make everything standard 1920 by 1080 or 4K if you would like. But for this tutorial, I'm only going to be doing 1920 by 1080 just to make everything easy for every single person. Frame rates, they take all the standard frame rates that we talked about with Amazon before, so I'm not going to go over that again. Avoid duplicated frames or blended frames. They do have chapter breaks, which I have a completely different video on chapter breaks, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. They have some audio requirements, PCM, which we'll get more into later. Again, we're just going to be using stereo, so we're not going to be doing anything crazy. Here's some other audio requirements. We're not going to be talking about this too much right now, but you need to have a good audio file. No clipping, no phasing, no distortion, no dropouts, ticks, pops, etc. Everything needs to sound great. So if your audio mix doesn't sound great, honestly, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to help you anyway. So hopefully you're coming into this tutorial with the best movie that you possibly could have made. And with the trailer, they have some similar things to Amazon. So we're not going to go over that again, but this is linked in the description if you do want to review it. So now that we've gone over everything, let's actually jump into our video editor and start preparing our file. So here I'm in Adobe Premiere Pro and I have my video file laid out here. Yours might look a little different because this is the master file. So, it's not gonna have all the cuts and all that. So just pretend like if you're exporting this in your actual video editor without a master file, which I 100% recommend creating a master file first in ProRes or something like that. Basically just an export, and then you take that export and start making all your deliverables out of that. That's what I did. But if not, you can absolutely export your actual movie with all the cuts and all that. But let's go ahead and get into it. So we got our main video file. So I've already imported all this. So we got my caching out film here. It's a frame rate of 23.976 frames per second. We got the media start and end, blah, blah, blah. It's about 2 hours long. And then I just went ahead, right-clicked, new sequence from clip. I'm not going to make that again because I've already done it. And everything should already match. And once you get to here, you're pretty much done, so long as you followed all the other requirements. So let's double check a couple of things. So we need to make sure that our first thing that comes up on screen is no longer than 2 seconds. So let's check that out really quick. So we're a little longer than 2 seconds. So we're actually going to cut a little bit at the front. And as long as we're on 1 frame of black at the beginning, we can actually just cut all that out. So we start on black, it's less than 2 seconds, so that's good there. Let's do the same thing at the end. All right, let's just chop off the end there. Okay, so that meets our requirements. We got a black frame, at least 1 black frame at the end, and then at least 1 black frame here at the beginning. And it's no less than, or it's at least less than 2 seconds at the beginning and the end like they liked. We also know another big problem a lot of people have is having links and stuff in their credits, which we don't have any links. So keep all your social media pages and, just websites and all that, keep it out because you're going to fail QC if any of those appear. Now, if you did this on YouTube or, like with your trailer especially or anything like that, you'll be able to do that on YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. But with these bigger platforms like Amazon, Filmhub, who distributes out to Tubi, Apple, etc., they don't want any of that. So keep it out. Now that we're here, we'll be actually able to render. So I'm going to hit Command M. So we want to go for the format. We want to choose the ProRes, wherever that is. I think that's QuickTime. So we have Apple ProRes that automatically pops up, but we need some more formats. So let's go to more presets. Let's type in ProRes. Let's find our ProRes 422 HQ QuickTime. Something else I almost forgot to mention, because Filmhub does, and Amazon too, that they have a certain bitrate requirement too. So if you want to check on that, Adobe Premiere Pro hides this a lot more than they used to. But if you did want to change that for some reason, you would just go to this More tab right here, scroll down, and then you should be able to find the bitrate. So for them, they have it so you can limit it. I guess they changed this a little bit. So I'll show you the H.264 too, because you're able to control that a little bit more. But H2 or the ProRes HQ is going to be the highest quality export possible, which is why obviously they recommend it and why I recommend it as well. So you're not going to have to change too much here. Something I forgot to mention also too, if you need to change the actual like resolution of this, so say you wanted to do like the scope, you can actually change this to a custom size too. So like I got the black bars on here right now because this is a 16:9 file, but let's say I wanted to do the scope, for instance. So that's 2048 by 858, I believe. So this is it's punching in a little bit here because it's trying to fit in that 16:9. But if I wanted to crop in here, I probably should have changed the actual resolution on my timeline here. So let me do that real quick. So 2048 by 858, which will be this resolution right here, but that's that 235 aspect ratio. And then I can just zoom in here in a second, so it actually fits properly. Okay, so now we got the proper resolution. So we'll go back to our export screen. And now you can see we're in the actual resolution. But if I needed to change this to 1080 for some reason, so if I wanted to do 1920 by 1080, now it should add the black bars back in. So you're able to change that pretty easily. Now, if you needed to make any audio changes too, admittedly, I'm not super familiar with the audio, so I just kind of leave it Premiere's export settings because they're pretty good. So they get the audio codec uncompressed, which is fine. We have it in our stereo, but if you need to change to 5.1, it's not going to give me that option right now because this is just stereo. So it's either going to give me mono, 2 channels, or stereo, which is left and right. But I am able to change the bit rate sample as well as the sample rate. So they recommend a minimum of 48 kilohertz, which is this 48,000 hertz right here, and a minimum of 16-bit, a sample size rate of 16-bit. So we're just going to leave that alone. So the standard Premiere export setting for the H.264 should work perfectly fine for you. So you really don't have to do much aside from maybe change the resolution. Filmhub requests that you put it in the actual aspect ratio of the film. So like we can go back and match the source so it's back in its natural resolution. But Amazon Prime prefers a 16:9, I believe. That's at least what I used for my film. So I think I created a separate export for this, but you're able to use the same settings essentially. You just need to change this to, a 16:9, which you should be able to do. So full HD in the drop-down menu, you just uncheck this box here and then select full HD, and that should give you the 16:9. If you need to change anything else, also like I said, they prefer the progressive field order. So make sure it's not interlaced. And then you can change the frame rate if you need to, but you should keep everything the same there. So if you shot in 24 or the 23:976, make sure it's the same all across. You don't need to change it to 30 or something goofy like that. Pretty much every platform can take this type of file or this frame rate, so you shouldn't have to do anything goofy there. And then I would keep this aspect setting the same. So if anything, you might need to change these 3 boxes. And I just saw this quality bar right here, so you could probably change that. It's not letting me do it right now, probably because it's in the HQ setting, but if I needed to change that and make the file a little bit smaller, I guess I could. But real quickly, I'm going to show you how to do H.264 in case you need to do that file format for some reason and keep it small, but we want to try to keep this as high quality as possible. So the same deal as before, we're going to go to our presets and then we're going to choose H.264. So they have an H.264 setting here. So they have some, they have some standard sizes here. If we're doing this for Filmhub, we want to make sure we match our frame size. So we're able to change everything else. So we're going to leave the rest of this alone. The thing that you're going to want to change is going to be more towards the bottom. So we have the bit rate settings here. So we need a constant bit rate. So we want to change this to CBR. They recommend for SD at least 15 megabits per second. And then for 4K UHD HD, they recommend 50 megabits per second. Right now, the standard on Premiere Pro is just 20. So we're just going to crank that up and see where that gets us. I'm going to crank that up all the way up, which 50 is the max. Right now, my estimated file size is about 18 gigabytes. So, my movie right now, I think is around 150 gigabytes with the ProRes HQ. It's not going to give me that. I don't think it gave me that estimated file size, but that's obviously huge compared to 18 gigabytes. Not as big, obviously, but that's obviously much better than if I were to go to like 20. And actually, it's jumping down for some reason. So I guess maybe for that size, it's not going to let me go all the way up to 50. So up to 47. So that actually brings me up to double the size, so about 40 gigabytes, but that's still a third of the size. So like I said, if you're going to do an H.264 file, just try to crank that up as much as possible. If you needed to do the 20, they only recommend for HD at least 15. So if you stuck with the 20, and then again, this is a 2-hour movie, that puts you at about 18 gigabytes. That's not too bad. Hey guys, just a note here. I realized while I was editing this video that I actually made a mistake. So Amazon and Filmhub don't necessarily recommend the constant bit rate like I originally thought. They actually prefer the variable bit rate. So we have two different options here if you click this drop down menu. So CBR is going to be your first one. That's the constant bit rate. And then we have variable bit rate 1 pass and then variable bit rate 2 pass. Now you should be fine with 1 pass, and this will just give you the 1 bar here. So you can still use the 20. I would actually go up a little bit higher just because with the variable bit rate, basically what it's going to do is it's going to add more data where needed, such as scenes that have like a lot of motion going on or anything like that, and use less data in scenes that may not require so much or just have as much motion or just not require as much data. So that's why they prefer the variable bit rate, because then the file size isn't going to be too massive, whereas with the constant bit rate, it's just going to be one constant bit rate throughout the entire movie. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, those faster motion scenes like I talked about, or just those scenes that may require more data. You may not be using enough data in order for those scenes to look very good. So you can have a lot of pixelation. You can actually see it in my image here right now. It's pretty pixelated because of this is actually a YouTube rip that I'm using for this tutorial. So you can still use the constant bitrate if you want. So I'm going to leave that in the video because I think it's good to see, but I would honestly use this variable 1 pass bitrate, or you can even use the 2 pass if you want, which you can actually set a range if you want. So if I wanted to set the target bitrate to 31, for instance, is kind of like my minimum, then I can have a maximum bitrate too. So I can go a little bit higher if I want to, but you should be fine with the 1 pass. I believe that's what I used on my film back in the day. But yeah, just wanted to quickly add that in here just because that information was initially wrong. And then if you wanted to do any of the other, like the Avid or the MPEG or anything else, you would pretty much follow the same steps that I showed you for the ProRes and the H.264. I personally stick to ProRes. I do have some H.264 master files, and then, for like uploading to YouTube and stuff like that, obviously I used an H.264 file for that. But again, I recommend you use the ProRes, but that is how you would change it for any of the other ones if you need to use any of the others. So we got MPEG-2 here. And then we got the, I believe we have the Avid. So here's the Avid. So that's pretty much how this would work on any video editor you would use. I'm not going to show you how to use any of the other ones, but you'd go in your export settings and hopefully they have these settings. If they don't, you might have to use a different editor like Premiere, Resolve, or Final Cut, but that's pretty much a basic rundown of how to export your file. After that, we just export and theoretically we should be good. We'll upload it to Amazon or Filmhub from there. This is how I've exported everything to Amazon and Filmhub in the past, and I haven't had any issues. So I definitely recommend just this very, very simple process right here. But now that we know what needs to be done, let's actually talk about some common issues that you may run into. So one issue that I'm constantly asked about all the time is the overcompression error given by Amazon or Filmhub during QC. Now, I know most of you that are watching this channel are no budget filmmakers like myself, doing everything for the least amount of money possible. You probably don't have infinite hard drive space to store massive files. For me personally, my master file for caching out was over 150 gigabytes, and I do have multiple versions of that. So if you do lack hard drive space, you're probably thinking to yourself, am I going to be able to make a small video file such as H.264 like I was talking about earlier? As long as it's a high quality version of that and it meets all the bitrate requirements that they list on their website, yes, maybe. But the problem I see more than not is that people are trying to make, take like my movie's 2 hours long, my master file for an H.264 is probably 15 gigabytes. That is something they have accepted in the past, but people are trying to take like a file that size and compress it down to less than, a gigabyte. That's not a good idea. I recommend buying a cheap hard drive. I mean, hard drives are a lot cheaper than when I made my film. You can usually get a terabyte for around $60 on Amazon right now. Get any Western Digital 1 terabyte external hard drive, and that should be more than enough for you just for one movie. But needless to say, you really need the highest quality file possible. I actually had somebody come to me who had this problem, and it was because they ripped their movie off YouTube. That's a big no-no. It's never going to work. Just don't do it. You need to have a high quality file or none of these platforms are going to accept your movie. Another big problem I see is that 2-second pre and post roll thing that we talked about at the beginning and the end of your film. You need to make sure your film starts no later than 2 seconds after you hit play and it ends 2 seconds after your credits roll. Now you can shrink that down to less than 2 seconds if you desire, but just make sure that you have no more than 2 seconds of black at the head and the tail of your film. Amazon will probably take it if it's like 5 seconds or something like that, but Filmhub absolutely will not. Just keep it simple, keep it less than 2 seconds, and you'll be able to use one file for both of these platforms. Another common issue I see is people putting links or promos or anything like that in their credits or over the movie or something like that. Both of these platforms are very strict. I actually had a client that I worked with who had a fake one inside of their movie, and they denied us or, caused an uproar in QC because they thought it was a real promo, but it was a promo within the story. So that's how strict they are. Keep your websites, social media links, all that, just keep it out. And there's a whole bunch of other QC problems, including, your movie isn't synced properly, your subtitles don't match the spoken words that are on screen, your audio is poor. There's a whole plethora of problems that I can list, and they all have one simple solution. You really need to be watching your movie and making the highest quality film that you possibly can. So I kind of got that backwards. Make the highest quality film that you possibly can, and before you actually export and deliver your films to these platforms, make sure there is no problems in your sound. Make sure the sound is good, make sure the picture's good, make sure if you have any subtitles, those are good. Have a colleague in the field double check it for you if you don't trust yourself to accomplish this correctly. It's really going to minimize the amount of problems that you have later. That is what I've done for all of my films. I have not personally had any QC issues, but even the QC issues I've had with my clients, we were able to solve all those pretty quick by doing a lot of those simple things that I talked about. So you really shouldn't have any issues submitting if you have a good quality film and follow what I've said. But if you do have issues, feel free to leave me a comment or shoot me an email, which is linked in my bio. And of course, if you're looking for easy to follow tutorials on how to upload to Amazon or Filmhub, I have a couple videos right here that you can watch next. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.